I'm Matt Scully. I'm the Director of Technology at Providence Day School, and I hope you have an opportunity to explore the flipped classroom. A little background on me. I have two daughters. I'm going to get this wrong. One's 13, one's 14. Since this is going online, I better get that right. I'm going to steal a line from Ed Fox, who works in the New Teacher Institutes. I didn't realize how stupid I was till my daughters got old enough to be teenagers, and now it's really, I'm so fortunate that they're around for me. But what's great, they'll be part of the story later. So we're going to talk about preventing the flipped classroom from flopping and some of the experiences that we've seen at Providence Day and some of the interactions that I've had with other schools and organizations that have tried some of these techniques and some of the things that have come up short. So as we get started here, one of the most important things to remember is that good learning is good learning. The tools don't make bad learning good, and the tools won't take good learning and necessarily make it bad unless we allow them to distract us from our purpose. Good learning is good learning. I love this comic because I share this with the kids all the time. Great PowerPoint done on a really expensive machine, but honestly, it was lipstick on a pig, guys. It was nothing. There was no content. There was nothing there. So same goes here. You can put really bad lectures online. You can take bad instruction and flip it, but it's still bad instruction. So I just want to put that out there as we get started. So I want to give you the big picture, and this is Albert Bierstadt, one of the Hudson Valley painters. And this is looking down Yosemite Valley is the name of the picture, but it just helped me as a visual to talk about the big picture. I want to talk a little bit about where flipping fits real well. We're going to talk later in the presentation about I've got a formula for how long your video should be, but you also need to be thinking about the age appropriateness with the group of students that you're working with. You also need to be thinking about the content. Science and math classrooms that have sometimes that real nice routine to them, that real predictable piece, are easier, even history, are easier places to insert the flipped classroom as a routine, as part of the regular process, because that's what the kids are used to. That's the feel they get, right? In math, we introduce a concept, right? We go home, we practice it. We come back the next day, we put the practice on the board. We talk about what the practice, what we were getting wrong. We introduce the new concept, and then we go home again. So the flipping space, flipping that turns into more time for guided practice in class, right? Take the pressure off those of us at home that have to support our teenage daughters doing math homework and having no clue what I should be doing or teaching them, right? Do the guided practice in class. I'll make sure they watch the video at home, I promise, right? It just sets up a different environment. And again, this is all about creating more time to actively engage with your kids and engage them with the content, right? The idea that they can go home and practice, but just like a musician who's practicing poorly, all you're doing is reinforcing the fact that you're practicing or playing poorly, right? There's no one there to give you any feedback. The opportunity to do guided practice. One of the models that's worked really interestingly at our school is an AP Psych class. But they don't do it all the time. In fact, he does it about 4, maybe 5 times a year. But the reason the flipped environment fits in that AP Psych course the way it does is because there's a real rigid agenda and timeline that they're trying to hit. But every once in a while when he flips, he creates space for himself to do some really fun, cool stuff. For example, flipped a lecture last year. That gave him enough class time to do an activity where the kids had to personify the different parts of the brain. Then they went around the room like doing 20 questions, like and having these interactions, and the emotional side of the brain was real over dramatic and in everybody's face, but they had this opportunity to really reinforce the characteristics of the different pieces of the brain. He's never been able to do that before because they've never had that space in the curriculum. So flipping the curriculum allowed him to create some of that space to do some more interactive, more experiential learning. My English classroom, I teach a freshman English course. Flipping the classroom works really well occasionally. It just doesn't, it's not going to be something that we do every other night or 3 times a week or quite honestly twice a month may be the most we hit. But if I'm going to introduce them to Shakespeare, why do they need to hear me lecture on that? Especially when there's some great content online from some really good experts that know more than I do. And quite honestly, their production quality is better than what I can create, so I'm going to throw them there. So I want to talk about these three individuals. First, John Dewey, and I mentioned this to Bo. As I read more about John Dewey and come to understand his philosophy of teaching, and I'll give you a real brief overcap summary. John Dewey was all about getting the kids to engage in the learning. That learning isn't something where you took an immature individual and you put them in a room and looking at them until they matured. That learning was really about engaging them in the learning process, right? They had to be an active participant in what was going on for them to be able to learn really well. Dewey was about helping kids learn, but he was also about helping them create models for learning, so that if they could learn this topic in this way, they could then encounter other things where they could pull a model that they've experienced and learn that content, regardless of whether they were in school, out of school, whatever. The idea of lifelong learning. So then come along Aaron Sams up top and John Bergman down below. These guys are fabulous if you ever get a chance to hear them speak. So they took, I think, and possibly without even knowing, the ideas of John Dewey and implemented them in their classroom. And their focus was really about saying, okay, I'm tired of standing up here and lecturing and you getting bored, and then you go off and practice and come back and you haven't practiced well, and then I give an assessment and you're not doing well in the assessment because you haven't practiced well, and then we move on. Right? That's the process. And some kids, are doing fine. Some kids learn this way and have no problem doing this. To me, they're the same kids that you put them in a dark closet with a 40-watt light bulb and a textbook. They're going to learn the content too, right? So what are we doing for all of our students, and how are we enriching that? And that's where I think Bergman and Sams really hit. And I want to throw one other guy in here while we're kind of talking about this, is a gentleman by the name of Shigatra Matira. He's in the TED Talks if you're looking for him. But the big idea here is that learning is a self-organizing system. What he did, his experiment, was he went into the slums of New Delhi and he put a computer in the wall. And the kids came up and said, "What's that?" And he said, "A computer." And they said, "How do we use it?" He said, "I don't know, I'll be back in 2 months." And he left, right? And when he came back, what he found is the kids had self-organized into learning systems where they were teaching each other. As the other kids learned, the older kids learned, they taught the younger kids who learned taught the other kids. And it became this self-organizing system where they started learning how to use the computer with absolutely no instruction. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go to absolutely no instruction, but what I'm saying is that because learning is a self-organizing system, often what we have to do is provide some curiosity, some motivation, and a little bit of content, and the learning can organize itself. And that's what I think the flipped classroom allows us to do. We expose the kids to the content. We let them go home and engage with that content, and when they come to class, we provide activities and engagement. So what are we going to do with this content? And it gives a wonderful opportunity for some choice, right? Yeah, it's like when my daughters were young, putting your pajamas on is a given. You're doing that. But do you want to wear the blue ones or the green ones? Suddenly they're in control and they've got choice. The same thing happens in your classroom. They've watched the content the night before. You can provide them some choices on what to do with the content. And we're going to talk more about this towards the end, but it's about mastery. It's not just about exposure to the content, although sometimes all we're doing is introducing an idea, right? And they'll master it in 9th grade or 10th grade or further down the line. But the flipped classroom, as Bergman and Sams do it, is about mastery of the content. We're going to keep going till we've got this, and then we'll move on. So the big thing I want you to be thinking about as we move into some of the nuts and bolts here is whoever does the work does the learning. I wish this was mine, but it's not. And I've seen this in a number of different places, but the idea is just whoever does the work does the learning. And when I heard this the first time, all I could think about was all these wonderful lectures that I gave to my, at the time I was teaching 8th grade. 8th grade students on Romeo and Juliet, where I spent like an hour and a half the night before getting all my resources together, putting it in the right order, getting it all framed up, inserting a joke here, and getting my lecture ready. And I'd go in and I'd deliver this top-rate lecture that the 8th graders, hey, whatever, it's Romeo and Juliet, we're not going to care a whole lot about. But I was so proud of myself, but really, I had done the learning. I knew the content because I had done the work. What I started doing with that same group of 8th graders, and this is a little bit off topic, but I started doing board meetings where we would sit down on Monday and we would talk about our goals for the week and what we had to accomplish, and then I'd let them pick how we were going to do it. And this led me into the flipped classroom, as well as my science teachers at Providence Day really wanted to bring Bergman and Sam's on campus, and that got us started. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. So what is flipping? Well, flipping is, you kind of start with the why, right? What is it that we have as far as prior knowledge? Why are we going to learn this? What are we doing with that? We're going to move into the what, which is our content and our curriculum. We're going to talk about how, both how do we put this together, but also how do the students, what's the action, what's the how? And then finally, most importantly, I think, is proof of success. Because with anything you're doing, we have that assessment piece, right? Why is it meaningful? How do we know we're doing this right? So let me break this down just a little bit. Again, the blue box is our why. This is where we're making connections. We're providing purpose. Anybody fans of Dan Pink? The drive, motivation? Okay. All right, you're going to see purpose, autonomy, mastery. They're all in here because I think what Flipped provides for us is the opportunity to create motivation. If our goal is to create students that are truly lifelong learners, right, or passionate learners, then we have to give them some autonomy and some motivation for taking on some of this content. But the reality is we've got to help them find the purpose and the connection. We can't go too far down the model where we let the kids do whatever they want, because I know as a child I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today if somebody hadn't kicked me in the seat every once in a while, right? But this is where we set that up, the backstory, the framing the learning. It's where we collect our prior knowledge. What do the kids know? Pre-assessment pieces. Part of what's going on here is when the teacher's organizing their lecture and creating the video or finding the videos that accomplish their goal. So then we move into introducing the skills and the content, right? So this is where we get into where the students are doing some of the work on their own. Autonomy, they're watching the videos. This is the homework section. And while we're talking about homework real quick, one of the things I struggle with is my older daughter, very much focused on handling the math. She's fine there, right? So when the teacher gave her 30 minutes of homework, it was roughly 30 minutes of homework, sometimes a little shy. My younger daughter, not so much. 30 minutes of homework. Same homework my daughter did in under 30 minutes is pushing 45, 50 an hour. Now part of that is we call her Squirrel for a reason. Any bright, shiny object and she's distracted. But love her dearly. But this, when you're showing a 20-minute video, it's a 20-minute video, right? Yes, it may take some students longer because they're going to stop and replay. But how cool is that they recognize that I didn't get that, I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to replay that. So that, again, that's the power of the video. So then, this to me is my favorite part. This is bringing them into class. This is designing fun, active, engaged activities where they're coming in with the content from the night before, and we're doing something with it. And when you're doing a lot of collaborative group work, it doesn't take long before you can step away from some of the little pop quizzes to make sure everybody watched the video, because they're going to hold each other accountable. Because if our group is doing this kind of online scavenger hunt based on the content from the night before and you don't know the content, you are a boat anchor around our legs as we're trying to swim across the pond. I don't want you in the group anymore. The kids will self-regulate after a while, and this becomes really engaging stuff. You give them the opportunity to bring the content and do something with it. Group projects, experiments, even the discussion gets richer, right? There's a lot of different pieces that come into this, but the PBL, the project-based learning, the problem-solving stuff, this is where the rubber meets the road and you really get the kids to engage. For the math folks, if you're not familiar with a gentleman by the name of Dan Meyer, I check him out. Dan is phenomenal, but one of the things he does is he really brings the idea of math as a real-world application, and he creates some really unique problems for kids to solve. One of my favorites is the grocery store. He goes into a grocery store, takes a bunch of pictures of the lines, right? And then asks the kids, using the mathematics, to figure out which line should you get into because which one will be the fastest. And the kids come up with some really wild variables, including the age of the person in the line and the likelihood that they may pull a checkbook out, right? So there's some really interesting stuff, but great application of the math skills that he's trying to teach. He shows them, I'm not saying he does, but you can show them a video to introduce the idea. They come to class, you give them a problem, now they've got to apply it. And then finally, the final piece, which is the making meaning, right? Demonstrating success. What am I doing What am I going to have these kids do to prove that they've successfully accomplished what I wanted them to learn? This can still be the traditional exam, right? Sometimes people think the flipped classroom has stepped away from anything at all that might fall under the umbrella of traditional learning, and that's not the case. Whatever the activity is, it's demonstrating that they've got the information, that they have the skills they need to move forward. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the hardcore nuts and bolts. Techsmith is a company that makes both Camtasia and ScreenChomp. ScreenChomp is an iPad app for capturing your screen. Camtasia is for the computer screen capture stuff where you can create your own videos. Early flipped at our school was the teacher on tape, so we videotaped ourselves. Yeah, we learned real quick they don't want to watch that. So what we started doing is capturing from, if you have smartboards, from the smartboard, right? So you're just doing a voiceover for what you captured in the smartboard. And honestly, smartboard, you can use Smart Record and get yourself the audio and the video all in one fell swoop. Other teachers went and grabbed the bamboo tablet from Wacom, I never know how to say that, and plugged those into the computer, and they're using different apps to draw on the screen and capture that, and again, doing the voiceover. A lot of different ways you can provide and create your own content. Then the other piece, and this is for the, well, my mother called me lazy. I say I'm just more efficient. But this is where you go out and you find somebody else that's already done what you need, and you grab those videos. YouTube, TeacherTube are great sources. The one thing I worry about with YouTube, we filter YouTube, but yet we send them there for homework. So not quite the same as saying, hey, we don't juggle knives at school, but when you get home tonight, grab a 5 or 6 steak knives, see what you can do. But I worry about that tension. So just be thinking about the tools that you use and where you're sending kids when they go home to make sure that you're not putting them in an environment you wouldn't be putting them in school. Flipped Learning Network, you can just Google them. Again, it's a network of educators that are sharing videos. It's all kind of this open source. Everybody's uploading their own videos. And then Khan Academy, again, another good source, but I strongly recommend you have to watch the videos first. You have to know what's in the content. A lot of times they're spot on, right where you want them to be, but there are other times the content, I've seen people have to fix things because it wasn't the way it should have been. And I don't know the math to know the details, but I'm just telling you, be careful with outside sources. The others that I should have put up here that I forgot to mention, for the upper school students, you've got MIT, Stanford. I mean, there's just all these open source places. iTunes U is a great place to go find a lot of this content. Also, podcasts are another great piece. There's a podcast called Grammar Girl that I occasionally will assign the kids to go listen to a Grammar Girl video or podcast in preparation for class tomorrow as we peer edit. So we're going to take what Grammar Girl taught us last night. That's going to be our focus on peer editing in class today. Okay, so I talked about the formula, the length of the video. Age of the student divided by 2 plus 1 or 2. So this is a real rough rule of thumb, but if you have 14-year-olds, about 7-8 minutes, right? Maybe 9, but you're going to push it. And if you're talking about watching the video, you can't just let them sit there, right? You got to train them how to watch a video. You got to train them on what to do while they're watching the video. How do I take notes? What should I be capturing? This is a question chart. Who's doing what? Who did what? Who might do something? And you teach the kids that the further down here you get, the higher order thinking you get, the better this stuff is. And this is exactly what you want the kids doing while they're watching. Thinking about why might something happen? How will something happen, right? I mentioned Mastery earlier. This is one of my favorite cartoons. I mean, and I feel like our system forces us to do this sometimes, right? Well, the kids don't seem to know this. Well, I taught it last year. Well, do they know it? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to go back and reteach it, but I taught it once, which was my job. No, they really didn't get it, but we had to move on because we had other stuff we had to accomplish. So flipping the classroom provides the opportunity to go back and do more mastery-based stuff. Again, because your time in the classroom allows you to be active and engaged, you can have kids doing different projects, doing different things that are differentiated for them that provides mastery. In our chemistry classes, for example, often some of the kids just come up and have a conversation with the teacher. and they'll check them off as mastered, right? Other kids, there's a problem set. They've got to demonstrate the problems that they've got it. All right, so finally, I just want to close on this. 500 teachers surveyed by the Flipped Learning Network. Now remember, this is the Flipped Learning Network surveying about flipped classrooms, so take it for what it is. 90% of the folks surveyed said they were happier as teachers. Happier as teachers. 67% saw an increase in student performance. Again, this is the Flipped Network surveying people about flipped classroom. So you've got an audience that's really hot on this idea, but people are reporting happier teachers and more successful students. Probably worth a look.